question here. What is the basis for concluding that the New Testament was originally written in Hebrew? Why does it matter, and what are the implications if it was? Well, first of all, I don't conclude that the New Testament was written in Hebrew. And I don't know that how anybody can definitively, because A, we don't have the autographs. We do not have the original manuscripts that the apostolic writers wrote the New Testament in. So we don't have those. The earliest manuscripts we have of the New Testament are in Greek and are from basically the 3rd century, more complete ones. I think there's some fragments from the 2nd century. The 300s. I think the oldest ones are from the 400s. I may be off a little bit in that, but I'm pretty close. As far as let me just tag this base. As far as the Aramaic goes, some people believe the Peshitta, which is the Aramaic version of the New Testament. There's a big debate about this, but they believe that this possibly may be older than the Greek texts. And I pondered that question for many years. But then I watched a video by Dr. Nehemiah Gordon, the Karaite Jewish Hebrew linguist and scholar in Israel, and he was interviewing, I forgot who he was interviewing, but he was interviewing a Jewish scholar, I believe was a professor at Hebrew University or one of those universities over there in Israel, and he was an Aramaic scholar, this individual, and I don't remember the name. I'm sorry, you can go look that up. And he showed how the Aramaic actually is a copy of the Greek. How do we know that? The Aramaic actually in the Peshitta uses a bunch of Greek words, and they gave examples of this in this video, which I saw with my own eyes, this interview a year or two ago. And it shows where the Aramaic did not have Aramaic words, and for certain words, and so it had to use the Greek words, which means it copied them from the Greek text. So to me, this was pretty good linguistic evidence from the Peshitta itself that the Aramaic Peshitta is a copy of the Greek. Okay, that's just a little side issue. So why do I think, this is my opinion and the opinion of many other people, why do I think, what is the circumstantial evidence? We don't have the primary evidence, but we have circumstantial evidence. This is a legal criminal term, if you will, circumstantial evidence that I believe that the New Testament, or most of it, maybe all of it, was written in Greek. I mean in Hebrew, not Greek. Well, first of all, and this is not in any order. This is off the top of my head. First of all, the New Testament is really a Hebraic document, and I think most Greek scholars, Christian scholars, will admit this, that the idioms, the metaphors, the symbols, the syntax, not all of it, many of them come right out of the Hebrew. The thought patterns, it's very Hebraic. It's not Greek. So we know at the very least that it was written by Hebrews, by Jews. I believe that every single book in the New Testament was written by Jews. Well, obviously the apostles were all Jewish, but what about Luke? Luke Luca is a Greek name. Well, I have a Jewish name. My name is Nathan, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm Jewish. In fact, I've done DNA, and I'm not aware that I have any Jewish. Israelitish maybe, but not Jewish as in from the tribe of Judah. I'm Northwestern European, like a lot of us. My grandmother came from Germany, and I got a lot of other German background in me from other sides of my family. I got a whole branch of the family that came from Ireland and England. My great-grandfather was born in Sweden. So I'm just Northwestern European. It's just, that's how that is. And beyond that, I don't know. I guess I have some Chinese in me too. I like 1%. There's, and my wife found out she's got, her family's German and Austrian and Irish English, or mostly Irish. And she found out she's got sub-Saharan African in her. So we've all got things in us. But anyway, the Jews were, so just because Luke's name is a Greek name does not mean or prove that he was Greek. I don't necessarily tend to think that he was Greek. He seems to have a great understanding of Torah and Hebrew culture. So I think he was probably Hebrew. But whether he was or not is immaterial. So almost all of the apostles were, or if not all of them, were Jewish. Number 2 or 3, all of them except Paul, I don't know about Luke, but all the rest of them came from Galilee or from that area. They came from the land of Israel. They did not speak Greek there. I'm sorry, but they did not. Now, some of them might have spoke a little bit of Greek, but not the guys from Galilee. Galilee was Hicksville, folks. Go read it. Can any good thing come from Nazareth, said the Pharisees? That's in the upper Galilee. They were viewed as unlearned men when they stood before the Pharisees. Like, how do these unlearned men know so much? That was what the Sanhedrin, when I think it was Peter and John were standing before them in the book of Acts. These were not educated men as far as learned in language. They were educated in Torah because when they went, back in that time, every town had a synagogue. The synagogue system was established in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah. And we know that from the time they were I think 8, all the young boys went to synagogue and to school. So they learned the Torah. They learned the Hebrew language. Well, you say, well, didn't they forget Hebrew when in 586, when the Jews were taken to Babylon and they were there for 70 years and they learned Aramaic, which was the language of Babylon? Well, first of all, yes, it is possible to forget your native tongue after 1 or 2 generations. My grandmother died when I was in my 20s. She was born in Germany and she spoke German, but she did not teach it to my mother or her siblings. My great-grandfather, who I knew, he died when he was in his 90s, in the early 60s. I was very young. I remember a 4-generation picture that I took that was taken of me with him when I was 3 or 4 years old. He spoke Swedish, but he did not teach it to his children. So it's very possible that they probably forgot, when they were in exile in Babylon, forgot Hebrew. That's how the Targums came about. The Targums were the Aramaic paraphrase of the Old Testament in Hebrew. But, and those are used in the time of Ezra and Nehemiah to teach the Torah from. And they had to interpret it back into Hebrew because what? Or why? Because there were still a lot of Jews that were living in the land of Israel, the poor Jews who did not get translocated as slaves to Babylon. And they would have kept the Hebrew language. So Hebrew was not a dead language. It was still spoken by the people that were still in the land of Israel, that the Jews who came back to under Ezra and Nehemiah from Babylon, they would have had to learn Jewish or Hebrew, but a lot of them were still speaking Aramaic, but they would have mixed with the Jews that were still speaking Hebrew. And this is 400 years before the time of Yeshua. And by the time they got to Yeshua's time, they were all speaking Hebrew primarily in the land of Israel. Why do I say that? Well, go read the book of Acts. It says that they spoke Hebrew, that Paul spoke to the crowd there in Jerusalem in the Hebrew tongue. Some of our Bibles, like the New American Standard, I believe, say Aramaic, but go look at the Greek. It says Hebrew. Go look at the sign that was on the top of the cross, Yeshua. His name Yeshua, King of the Jews, is written in 3 languages: Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Hebrew was at the top. That was the main language because the Romans wanted to see, they wanted to proclaim to the Jews who he claimed to be. And that really ticked the Jewish leaders off, because they said he was not the king. But the Romans were making a mockery by putting that up there. And that was the first language, number 1. Number 2, the Dead Sea Scrolls were all written in Hebrew, not Aramaic and not Greek. So we know that the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Qumran community that existed from about 150, 200 BC to about 100 AD, so for about 250 years, they all spoke Hebrew. Josephus tells us that in the land of Israel, now Josephus wrote around 100 AD, 100, after the fall of the temple. So 100 AD to 130, he wrote there in the 1st century, into the 2nd century. He says that the Jews of Judea would have rather eaten swine's flesh than to have spoken Greek. Now, Josephus was a learned man. He spoke Greek. He's the one that stood on the wall when Jerusalem was defeated in 70 AD, and he translated to Titus, the Roman general, the Hebrew that the people were speaking to him and the surrender terms, and he was the translator back and forth. So they were speaking in Hebrew. Also, we have almost from the ancient Jewish sources of that time, the Mishnah, all in Hebrew. It's not in Aramaic. It's not in Greek. The coinage. I could show you coins that are 2,000 years old that I have in my coin collection that I've bought in Israel. All Hebrew, not Aramaic and not Greek. I've got copper coins and I've got silver coins. I've got widow's mites and I've got shekels. All in Hebrew. And the apostles, the disciples who became the apostles, probably did not know Hebrew because it was not taught to, or Greek, because it was not taught to them in the synagogue. Now, true, the trade routes between Asia, Europe, and Africa all went through, there were major trade routes for thousands of years, went through the land of Israel. I would say the trade routes, the land trade routes. And so it is true that Greek was the language of the Greek Empire, and it was the language of commerce even during the Roman Empire. But the Jews maintained, by historical record, linguistic record, coinage record, and other things, written record, they maintained Hebrew because that was part of their religious system. And so that's why I don't know how many of you have learned foreign languages. I have learned a foreign language. I have studied other foreign languages, and I have studied Greek and Hebrew. It's not easy. It's hard work. I've studied Spanish off and on, and I'm in the process of taking Spanish classes right now. Why, I don't know. But I like Spanish food. I like Spanish music and that kind of music. And there's a lot of Spanish people or Hispanic people who speak Spanish around me, and I'm probably figuring I'm going to have to hire some for my tree service, so I better know some of their language. And my wife and I are going to Spain here in about a month. So, although most of them speak English there, but I'd like to be able to converse a little bit, at least, where's the bathroom or something, or how to order, or what's it cost, or whatever, some basic things. So I've been doing that, and I'm having fun. I got my Spanish Bible right here, but it's hard. So I doubt they spoke English, and how would they have known, Greek, and how would they have known it well enough to write scripture? Now, it's possible. Now, Paul, ¿dónde está el baño? Well, actually, the best thing is that's the bathroom. So you want to say, ¿Dónde está los servicios? Or los, what's the other word? There's another word. Sanitarios. So that's would be more like restrooms. So I've learned that one. So anyway, thank you, Donna. We're doing a Zoom meeting here. This for those of you on YouTube. This is live on Zoom as well. Anyway, so it's very possible that the New Testament writers might have dictated it to people who wrote it down in Greek. It's very possible. But Papias, who lived in he was one of the early church fathers, and we only have a fragment of Papias. That's all right, Donna. This makes it fun and spontaneous. People are chatting to me. It's all right. No, not a problem. We can have fun and we can laugh a little bit along the way too. There's nothing wrong with that. We don't have to all be stick in the mud and anyway. So and I tend to be kind of a stick in the mud sometimes. So I'm glad to lighten things up with a little bit of comedic relief. It's okay. And if some of you on YouTube don't like it, well, you can switch the channel. I don't really care. Make my day. But I think most of you have a good heart and don't mind a little humor along the way. So it's quite all right. Anyway, so Papias, who was a contemporary of Polycarp, who was also a contemporary of John the Revelator. So these lived at the same time as John, toward the end of John's life. Papias, and I have it up here up here on my shelf in the writings of the early church fathers. I looked it up the other day, but Papias says that the book of Matthew was written in Hebrew. Okay, just saying. That's the only example from the early church fathers that we have, or record, that Matthew at least was written in Hebrew. Okay, it's not exactly 2 or 3 witnesses, but I tend to think, this is my opinion, based on all this evidence, that at least the non-Pauline epistles were written in Hebrew. Now, Paul, who was from Damascus and very educated, he obviously spoke Greek. He was very educated. He was able to, he was sat at the feet of Gamaliel, who was the grandson of Hillel the Great, who was the leading rabbi of his day and of the modern era. Just saying. So Paul would have been multilingual. So he was ideal vessel in Jehovah's hands for taking the word out to all the Greek-speaking cities that he went to, because he obviously knew Greek. So he very possibly could have written in Greek, and I don't have any doubt about that. Well, I don't debate that. It's possible. Whether he did or not, I don't know. It's possible. And I don't know. So that's possible. So I don't necessarily even stand on that hill to say that I believe that the entire New Testament was written in Hebrew. It might have been. I don't know. Now, there's other linguistic evidence, too, in the text itself. In the Gospels, for example, and I was just reading the other day, but there's several places in the Gospels that say, and again, I don't have time to go through this, but look for the passages in Matthew and elsewhere where it says, and it is translated into, or meaning, and then it will give you the Greek word if you go look at the Greek. There's several places where, and this may have been probably not original, but it might have been edited in later on by when the New Testament was being canonized by John, by Peter, by Paul, whoever, in the late first century. But it says it gives a Hebrew word, a Hebrew name, and it says being translated, and then it will give the Greek. Or it appears that Yeshua when he's on the cross, he's saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani. I believe that's Aramaic. So he was probably bilingual. And then they translate, my God, into Greek. My God, why have you forsaken me? Whatever the Greek is, I can't say that off the top of my head. I do know the Aramaic, but I believe that's Aramaic. So there's a lot of stuff going on here, folks. And the idea that the New Testament was written in Greek exclusively, totally, that's basically comes out of the idea of the Greek primicists that want to believe in a Greco-Roman Yeshua, and that's an idea that the church has been, the Christian church from the Catholic Church on down, has been promoting down through the ages, and that's the thing that has stuck in Christianity, and yet there is a lot of evidence that would indicate otherwise. And the Jerusalem school that was led by, I forget the name of those guys. They're dead now. But they did a lot of work back in the, 60s and 70s. There were a couple scholars, Blizzard and Blevin, I think is their name. And I've quoted their books. But anyway, it's called the Jerusalem School. They went into a lot of evidence, and there were scholars at Hebrew University. I'm trying to think of the one. I can't think of his name. He's dead. They looked into this, and they saw good evidence that a lot of the New Testament was probably written in Hebrew. There's so many idiomatic expressions and so forth and so on. So anyway, why do I think it's important to consider this? Well, it's about viewing the New Testament more through Hebraic eyes than through Greco-Roman eyes. At the very least, the New Testament was written by people that had a Hebraic, Jewish, Israelitish background, cultural background, religious background, linguistic background. And we need to understand it in that context to understand what they were saying, as opposed to looking at them as Greek-speaking Romans, blonde-haired and blue-eyed, Anglo-Saxon, whatever. They probably weren't. Well, they weren't Greco-Roman. And the Eastern mindset is very different than the Oriental mindset, of which the land of Israel was part of the Orient, is very different than the Greco-Roman Western mindset. I've done articles on that. Books have been written about the difference between Greek thinking and Hebrew thinking. Is it a precondition for salvation? No, to understand these things. But to be a Bible teacher, it is helpful to understand these things. That's why I have all these lexicons up here in Greek and Hebrew, so I can get behind the words and understand were they translated correctly or not, and try to understand how these words and these phrases and these idiomatic expressions were used so I can be a better, more accurate Bible teacher. And again, any of you who have studied foreign languages, you know what I mean, because some things don't translate into foreign languages. And it's helpful to understand. When you're going back and reading about George Washington, doesn't it help to know a little bit something about what life was like in colonial times? If you're going to read about Napoleon or about a Roman emperor, it would be helpful to know about what life was like in those times. So, because they didn't have electricity, they didn't have the internet, they didn't have the internal combustion engine or the steam engine, it might help to know a little bit about what their life was like. Same thing. If you lived in a city all of your life and you've never seen a farm, you've never seen a vegetable garden, you've never seen farm animals, it's really hard to understand what life on a farm was like or is like. Or if you lived on a farm all your life in the middle of Alaska or wherever, in the wilderness, and now you suddenly dropped in like Crocodile Dundee into the middle of the city, you're going to have a hard time. You're going to be saying some things that you don't, that maybe sound kind of weird. Or when Crocodile Dundee, when he took his girlfriend over to Australia and she's trying to understand what's going on over there, like the movie. It's the reverse of it. You're like Rip Van Winkle. You wake up 100 years later in a new world and you don't understand. That's the idea here. So that's why it's good to understand these things, okay? I hope that made sense, and I hope that maybe answered some questions here.